So now we've looked at the specific definitions, the different types and the different methods used by pressure groups. We're going to have a look at the more theoretical and political problems that pressure groups face. And the first question we're going to ask is, why are some pressure groups more successful than others? And as an introduction, it must be said that it's actually quite difficult to decide exactly which pressure groups are most successful, because success is quite a difficult thing to measure. It could be the case that some pressure groups have very large impacts, but with little publicity. And at the same time, less successful pressure groups might make a lot of noise, but then they don't necessarily get their aims achieved. So it has to be said that when it comes to the success of pressure groups, it's not something that can be measured quite easily, or measured empirically as well. So it must be said, though, that a small number of factors can be examined to decide the sort of relative success of pressure groups. Whilst we can't have an exact measure on which pressure groups are most successful and which ones aren't, we can get a general idea of using these factors of the kind of success that different pressure groups have had and the kind of success that other pressure groups haven't had, for example. So one thing that impacts the effectiveness of pressure groups, their success rate, is the different aims that they have. So the aims of pressure groups are vital to examine why some are more successful than others. Central to this theme are two concepts in political theory. Those are practical achievability and public receptivity. So these are two ideas within political theory, specifically within the role of pressure groups. Just stumbling over my own tongue. So, practical achievability. This is the extent to which a group's main goals are achievable in practice. So, for example, an example here is, while the Snowdrop's campaign to aim banning handguns in the UK was clearly an achievable goal practically, the core aim of most anti-globalization protesters is probably not. So the idea being that the aim of some pressure groups are achievable, practically achievable, things like banning handguns, for example. However, more large, international, almost inevitable things like globalization are very difficult to, if you want to reverse globalization, it's quite a difficult thing to do as a pressure group. So for this reason, we can make a distinction in the success of pressure groups by their practical achievability, by their ability to achieve things practically effectively. You can also make distinctions of the success of pressure groups through the public receptivity. So this generally refers to the extent to which the public are sympathetic of the group's aims. Those groups which have aims that are opposed to prevailing popular mood of the country are unlikely to achieve any success. And a good example of this are the various pressure group campaigns pushing for a second EU referendum. They did not have public support, and so they had limited success. So you can really talk quite a lot about the Brexit. I mean, it's quite hard to talk about anything other than Brexit these days. So when we talk about the EU referendum and wanting a second EU referendum, there were definitely groups pushing for a second EU referendum, or pushing for just to ignore the first referendum. However, these are very unpopular ideas, seen as 52% of people did still vote to leave the European Union. So therefore, their public receptivity was very low, and therefore they had very limited success. Success could also be measured by measuring the group's resources. So a success of a pressure group will inevitably be influenced by the resources available to that group. We can divide resources into two different subgroups. So we've got human resources, and we've also got material resources. Human resources effectively includes the number of people available to put to work in an effort to achieve the aims of the group. So the amount of manpower effectively that one has. Material resources obviously refers to money, equipment, land, etc. So things that are non-human, so available to the group. So the amount of money one has, the amount of equipment one has, the land available, for example. There are examples of pressure groups gaining success from limited material resources because of a large reliance on human resources. So, for example, things like Fathers for Justice were successful in public because they were successful publicly because of the numbers of people involved in the different protests. You could also make the claim that celebrity endorsements could also heighten the success of a pressure group, because it also brings into the public light more the aims of the said pressure group. So, for example, Jamie Oliver's involvement in the Feed Me Better campaign for healthier foods in schools was relatively successful. However, you could also say that controversial celebrities would inevitably impact a particular campaign negatively as well. So, human resources can be measured quite in an interesting number of ways. It's not necessarily just the sheer number of people that one has, like, for example, the Fathers for Justice case, but it could also be the public, the celebrity of individual people. So people like Jamie Oliver getting involved in campaigns for healthier food in schools. Finally, we can look at the methods used by pressure groups, which is something we looked at in the last video, but in this one we're going to look at why that could lead or lend to more success. So the success of a pressure group could entirely be determined by the methods they use and to get their message across. There's a crucial balance needed, however. High-risk methods could pay off because they'll get the word out, but the most high-risk methods tend to be at least somewhat controversial. Okay, so controversy really is something that will go viral very quickly, and pressure groups know this. So generally the more controversial methods that are used by pressure groups are the ones that get the more people talking about it. And some pressure groups tend to take the view of, bad publicity there's no such thing as bad publicity. All publicity is good publicity. So they don't care getting bad publicity for some of their controversial methods, as long as it is getting the message across and getting people aware of their existence. For example, using violence would definitely be a good way of getting publicity for a pressure group. People would definitely want to know about that, but it's probably not going to have a positive impact. And this is an example that we've seen in leading social movements. So we've got things like the various Antifa movements. Antifa stands for anti-fascist, so an anti-fascist movement. And while it's not a single organisation, it's definitely a social movement. One would argue is a social movement, and it's simply just anti-fascism is the idea of opposing fascism in whatever way possible, and this does include things like reporting, blocking, and people off social media websites that are fascist. However, the most popular methods, the methods that get the most publicity from Antifa are the methods of violence. So some of its members use violence in the past, and the violence is never portrayed in a positive image to the wider public. So you can see here things like social movements of Antifa. Antifa is a very well-known organisation. I say organisation, a very well-known social movement. However, it doesn't necessarily have the sort of positive publicity that their members probably would like it to have. So with all that being said, the methods used are very important for when we look at the relative success of a pressure group.